Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. A little better. There we go. Well, happy Halloween. We're here on Halloween night. We're going to do some content that I've been telling you about, and we're going to tell a story about, well, the supernatural, or maybe it's not. True events that have transpired that will leave a chill down your back. So, shall we get into it? I've received a submission from friend and subscriber Matt Cumberledge. And he's a great guy. And he's the curator for the Greene County Museum in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. And Matt writes a story. He shares a story of his family history pertaining to a certain date and area and time. So, let's begin. Now, this story is, of course, a piece of history. So if anyone who has sensitive ways of whatnot, please view the story and the time that was written and that it took place. Okay. The legend of Kelmus Fork. It is with singular concern we announce to the public that on Saturday, the 23rd of April, 1789, a party of Indians murdered on the headwaters of Dunkard Creek 5 persons. So read a story in the May 2nd, 1789 edition of the Pittsburgh Gazette. It was just a few days before the ancient festival of Beltane, or as the Germans refer to it, Valkyrie's night. Seasons were changing. Planting season was beginning, and for the frontier settlers of the uppermost regions of Appalachia, just as it was for their ancestors in Europe thousands of years ago, it was a time when the veils between worlds was at its thinnest. Beltane was the springtime sister of Samhain, or as we call it today, Halloween. It was a chilly, misty morning in April of 1789, when Joseph Cumberledge, a man in his 40s, had begun his daily routine, feeding the livestock and preparing a hoard of firewood to get the family through the winter. His wife Alice and 2 children were also engaged in these labors. Frontier life was difficult. Everyone did their share of the work. Not going or not doing so would result in starvation or over the course of the brutal northern winters. Suddenly, a loud whooping rang through the nearby woods. Excuse me. Suddenly, a loud whooping rang through the nearby woods, a sound that would have brought feelings of despair, the sound of Armageddon. A group of 3 Indians who had just murdered William Thomas at his home a few miles distant had left the site heading directly towards the Cumberledge settlement. Joseph and his wife Alice were scalped, just as William Thomas had been, and their 2 children were also murdered. Later that afternoon, the bodies of both William Thomas and the Cumberledge family were discovered and buried in a simple, unmarked grave by Justice of the Peace Henry Van Meter and Gabriel Eakins. This event raised the alarm on the frontier, with concerns being taken directly to the governor of Virginia, who insisted that President Washington be aware of the matter. This incident led to a chain of events that culminated in the defeat of the Indians at the Battle of Falling Timbers by General Mad Anthony Wayne in 1794. Luckily, Joseph's entire family was not killed in the attack on Kelmus Fork of Dunkard Creek in 1789. His oldest son, George, had married in Maryland when the family came to the border of Pennsylvania and Virginia in 1778. Just a month before his family was killed, George had married a Miss Rachel Barber at the Lutheran Church in Frederick, and it is through his line that the Cumberledge family continues. George would, however, relocate to his father's home shortly after his death. And now, nearly 250 years later, many of Joseph's descendants still live in the area in which he was killed. Throughout the course of the last century and a half, however, many of Joseph's descendants and others who lived in the community would report strange happenings. In the morning of April 23rd, right around the time of the Civil War, Joseph's great-grandson, Armand, would return home from hunting, telling his family a tale of cries and screams and the sounds of galloping horses in the location of where Joseph's cabin once stood. Again, in the late 1890s, Joseph's then elderly grandson, Daniel, would tell his grandchildren that he'd witnessed a spectacular group of Indians running through the woods, heading to the family farm, and after they had gone out of sight, screams could be heard echoing high into the treetops. From time to time ever since, many have reported similar incidents, and though the exact location of Joseph's home has now been lost in the labyrinth of the past, it is said that if you stumble across it on a misty April morning, just days before the festival of Beltane, you too just might witness the attack on the Cumberledge household that left most of the family laying in a field of blood. That is the story from Matthew Cumberledge. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a chilling story, and not unlike most stories from the frontier. It was very difficult times, and I appreciate that story, and I hope you found it interesting as well. Now we're going to relight this pipe, and I'm going to share a story of my own. You probably hear crows crowing. How appropriate. How appropriate. Well, my story involves a friend's house. Back in 2007, I believe, that was my friend's house in the canyon near Yucaipa, California. We spent a late night telling joke stories and everything and having a good time. A friend and I, we paid our friend a visit, and we decided to stay the night. He had a spare room, and so we crashed in the spare room, and we started to fall asleep. Now, the spare room was also a storage room where my friend kept a lot of collectibles. He had things from Hollywood's golden era, also World War II relics. This room was very, very touched, if you will. Next to the bed was a mannequin that wore a dress belonging to Anne Rutherford, a famous actress of the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And next to that, not far away from that dress form or mannequin, was a stack of 4 Rubbermaid large bins with lids. They were carefully stacked neatly. They were all full of uniforms and clothing of the 1930s and 40s. Very heavy. If anyone's ever handled one uniform from that era, you know that it's not a light piece of garment. So, with this being said, we turned out the light and retired. Within minutes of the light going out, there was a massive crash in the bedroom. We turned on the light and noticed that 3 of the bins that were stacked fell over and knocked the dress form over, and it came within inches of hitting my friend in the head. Our friend who lives there, he came in and he was concerned and was asking what was going on, if we were up to something, if we're just clowning around and roughhousing or something. But those crows are crazy right now. Anyways, we said no, we were just trying to sleep, and these bins fell over, and it knocked the dress over. And he laughs, and he says, "Well, I hope you guys have a good night." Well, we did, of course, stack the bins again and put the dress back upright, but there's no way that those 3 bins could have fallen over. They were stacked neatly, and they're heavy. It would have taken a seismic event for those to fall over. We were in an enclosed room, no windows were open, no breeze, nothing. They just fell over and knocked over the dress that almost took my friend out. So, yeah, that's pretty disconcerting. On another occasion, my then girlfriend, now wife, Ashley, we were spending a night in the same bedroom in our early courtship. And she's a good friend of my mutual friend that we stayed at. And we were paying him a visit, and of course it got late, so we decided to spend the night instead of driving all the way back home. So we stayed the night, and I slept fairly well. However, my wife was up continually throughout the night because there was sounds that she was hearing. My friend had a bowl of spare change on top of a dresser in the bedroom, and she was hearing something play with the change on the dresser. She heard the sound of rustling change throughout the night. She heard other things moving around on that dresser. Now, she told me this later after we left, and I had no reason to doubt her. At that time, my friend had a piece of German World War II history. And for those who may not know, well, of course they know that the German World War II uniforms and everything have a dark tendency. The German Nazi Party, of course, left an indelible mark upon human society. And he has some relics of the German military from World War II. And, of course, they have things attached to them. And I've heard many stories of people that own such relics that have experienced abnormal things happening in their home because of their possession of these items. And when they relieve themselves of these items, then the commotion stops. But things calmed down after he sold the item that was on the dresser. Now, the item that was on the dresser was a shirt and cap and accessories that belonged to one of the members of the Brown Shirts. Of course, we know that they were Hell's Boy Scouts, more or less, and they did many terrible things. So any piece of that history, of course, in my opinion, would have very dark energy connected to it. So with that being said, it's your decision to believe it or not, but I can assure you it did happen. And it happened to many people who've stayed in that room. Thankfully, my friend moved from that house in the canyon. He did find many arrowheads in the local area in the canyon there. So maybe there was an Indian burial ground nearby, or maybe the things in his collection were causing disturbances. You draw your own conclusion. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed these stories and the submission from Mr. Cumberledge. I think that's a fascinating story. And there's a lot of abnormal or paranormal or supernatural things that happen in that territory to this day. A lot of things that can't be explained. History is a very strong thing, and it will leave an indelible mark on Earth. Maybe scorched Earth, if you will. Many accounts have come from Gettysburg and all the battleground states where human suffering was very, very high. So don't rule out things just because you don't understand them. Life is full of mysteries, and maybe they can't be solved, but There's no reason to doubt them. Hope you had a happy Halloween. Hope you enjoyed this video I had a moment to make for your enjoyment. And I hope that you will continue subscribing and liking the channel and sharing it with your friends. And we'll see you again next time.